So good morning.
Shall I start?
Yes, Mohan.
Yeah,
give me 1 minute. So let me just give a small introduction. So good
sure.
morning, everyone. Welcome to our May monthly meetup. Thank you so much. We have a lot of people who have jumped in to attend the event. This is really great. I appreciate the time you have taken off on a Saturday to come and be part of the monthly meetup. So most of you may already know about Coimbatore FrontendGroup. For those who don't know, we are a small community who, predominantly we established ourselves in Coimbatore, and we were focused on the Coimbatore community. But then post the pandemic, we had, since the meetups went on to be remote meetups, so we had a lot of people pouring in from around the globe. And as Tristan was asking, are we predominantly in English? Yes, as of now. We try to keep all communications in English so that everyone is able to benefit from the community. So for our first session today, we have Mohan. So Mohan Kumar is a front-end developer in Atlassian. So Mohan is here to speak with us about Webpack. So since Webpack is something we are using on a day-to-day basis now, I hope it will be useful for many of you. And if you're not yet using Webpack, this would be a great introduction. So Mohan, on to you.
Okay. I don't have permission to share my screen.
You should be able to share your screen now, Mohan.
Okay. Desktop. Okay, 1 second. So I have to give the permission. So I'll leave the meeting and I'll join back in a second. I give the permission now.
Yeah. Yes, Mohan.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, have Mohan back. Awesome. So just give me a minute while I give you the permission to share. Yes, Mohan, can you try now? You should be able to share your screen.
Yeah, check. Yeah, now I can. Previously, I didn't have a permission. Yeah.
Okay.
You guys can see my screen? The slide?
Yep, it's visible.
Awesome. Yeah. Good morning, everyone. I'll give a small intro about myself. Already, there is a small intro. So I'm Mohan. So I'm currently working as a front-end engineer in Atlassian. So here I'm going to discuss about Webpack and how Webpack is used to optimize and how do we use Webpack in our day-to-day front-end development. And there will be some hands-on sessions as well. So if anyone most of them already would have been worked with Webpack and they would have hands-on. And for someone who is new, the Webpack will be kind of little bit difficult to start. So even I face a lot of difficulties to understand what is Webpack. Even I have like 9+ years experience, and still there was certain difficulties in understanding how Webpack is used and how it is used in the front-end development. So if there is any questions, you can just interrupt me at any time and I'll be happy to jump in. Right, okay. All right, okay. So if you talk about Webpack, we always know like Webpack is a module bundler for JavaScript application, right? So previous to Webpack, there were certain bundlers like Gulp, Grunt, all those things were available, and Webpack was getting more famous, and it was now predominantly mostly used bundlers for JavaScript application. So previous to Webpack, how do we write JavaScript and how do we uh, bundle JavaScript, right? So we used to write JavaScript in a script, in between a script, or we will load a JavaScript file in a source and then we load it. The problem with this kind of loading is the loading has to be sequenced, and it has to the files has to get loaded one after the another. And when you interchange the order of loading, your things will get broken. So we started to use some bundlers like Gulp and Grunt. So what that does, it takes all the JavaScript whichever you present in HTML on some config file, and it will amplify it. It will merge all the JavaScript together, and it makes a bundle. And then this bundle started, and we deliver this bundle to the client. But there were few problems in this approach as well with Gulp and Grunt because what happens is in JavaScript we use a lot of libraries. For example, we use Lodash, and if you see, Lodash will be used across multiple files. And when we started to bundle using Gulp and Grunt, this Lodash is also gets bundled across multiple files, because of which your dead code and unused codes are not removed, right? So which increases your network bundle, and but your bundle, if the bundle size is increased, what happens is like you'll get a delay in the client, and that particular code has to get executed as well. So it takes a lot of memory and it will take a lot of time. So basically your application will be slower. So these were the problem we used to face before Webpack in Gulp and Grunt. So we bundle it, a huge file, and then we try to deliver the client. And there will be a lot of duplicate codes and unused codes, which is very difficult to delete it. There were tools for static code analyzer, but still that were not that efficient. So when we are coming to Webpack now, so how Webpack is trying to solve this problem? So we said like it is helpful to module the JavaScript files, and it will help to remove the unused codes, and it will help to organize our bundles so that it can be effectively and efficiently delivered to the client. So we'll see like how Webpack does this more effectively. Any question till now, why we are discussing about Webpack? And previous to Webpack, there were certain tools, but that were not that efficient for the advanced web application. Yeah. So we see that Webpack takes a series of JavaScript files along with dependencies. So there are certain dependencies JavaScript files will have, such as we'll be loading an image, we'll be loading a CSS, and then we'll be loading the background image, certain other dependencies, which will be helpful to create the application. So what Webpack does, it takes all the dependency files, it might be other JavaScript files as well, and constructs something called a dependency graph. So what we call as a dependency graph is very important. If you see about dependency graph, this is a kind of a representation of how these files and dependencies are ordered and linked with an application, and shows how these files interact with each other. So what happens is this: when the Webpack runs through your source code, so it will create a dependency graph like a JSON object by itself, representing how these files are linked to each other. For example, you have a file a.js, which internally depends on b.js. And if you go to b.js, it will internally depend c.js. But Webpack will try to avoid the circular dependency, that we are not going to discuss how circular dependencies are resolved. And it's not going to get resolved when you say like A depends on B and B depends on A, how this is going to get resolved. So we are not going to discuss on that part. But Webpack internally creates a JSON object that shows how your application, all the files are interrelated, and how these files are having dependencies on each other. Okay, so if you see, the dependency then forms a template. That's what it's called, JSON. so that the Webpack bundler follows and taking all the dependencies and files and compress them into smaller sets. So this we'll see in a live action, like how it happens. Okay. And Webpack then able to bundle these files into a larger but less numerous set of files. So this is our way how we are going to bundle and how many bundles we need. So we can able to handle this. So what problems it is eliminating the Webpack mostly is unused code. This is the biggest problem in the larger scale web applications and the unused codes and repetitive codes. Okay, I'll come back to that as well. That needs for rewriting. So this is how the Webpack will make a dependency graph, and with the help of the dependency graph, it will try to remove the unused codes, as well as if the code is reused in multiple places, it will pluck that particular code out and try to create a separate bundle, and it adds the dependencies on the particular file so that this bundle gets called before that particular code gets executed. So these are the problems we are going to solve using Webpack. If we solve this problem, then we will write an efficient code, as well as we'll be writing a lesser code so that it is used properly. Okay, so this is how the Webpack works, right? So how it solves a problem, right? We talk about ESM, ECMAScript module, which we call require, and if you see the React, mostly we call as import and require. So require is supported in the browsers as well now. So what Webpack does, it goes to the every file and sees require. So which means this particular file has a dependency on other files as well, right? So Webpack will detect the statement and determine the files needed as a dependency. This is how the dependency graph JSON is created. And this will decide how these files are processed in your JavaScript final bundle. So if you see a particular JS has a dependency on a template, that is like some handlebar template and some JS and SAS and other images, which enters into Webpack, and then it comes as some sort of JavaScript bundles, CSS and other JPEG. So it is used for optimization images as well. So this is how Webpack actually works. Okay. You guys are clear till now? Because we are going to go for some practical session, like how we are going to see how Webpack works. Any questions till now? Am I audible?
Yes.
Yes.
Awesome. Okay. Okay. I'm going to share my Visual Studio. So you guys can. So from now it's hands-on session. There won't be any boring much talk. So this will be kind of bit tough to follow, but once you get into the code, it will be really interesting, like how Webpack works. Okay. I created a folder called Learn. So now we will see like how we are going to do a Webpack. Okay. So I'm going to initialize a project using Yarn. So I'm using Yarn here. Yarn. I'm initializing a project using init. -by. So this would have been initialize my project, and package.json is generated. It's a simple package.json, which currently contains nothing. So now I'm going to add our main dependency, which is yarn add webpack and webpack CLI. -d is for adding dependency for the dev dependency, so that this particular code need not to be present in the production dependencies. So we have dependencies as well as dependency. Whatever goes inside dependency is part of source code. Whatever goes inside dev dependency is going to be not part of your source code. So we have created our Webpack, right? So now we create a folder. Okay, so I'm going to create a folder like this. So the source is created, and I create an index.js, and I'm going to write a console.log Webpack. And if you see the version what Webpack we use version 5. So that's the latest one. So we are into the latest, right? So then, so we have created this, and now we can run something called yarn Webpack. So which means we are executing Webpack, and once Webpack is executed, you can see a particular folder called dist is created. So dist. So inside dist, if you see, there is main.js, and we can able to see whatever the code we have written, and that is particularly generated here. Okay, let's write a simple function. Constant hello. I'm using an arrow function and say console.log webpack. Right. So I'm going to execute webpack again. So so if you see main is generated, oh, interesting.
Hello, Mohan. I think that function is not called because of that. It's not creating the bundle.
Oh, it's unused code, right? Yes, sorry. Yes. Okay, then we'll go to the arrow function itself. Okay, that's really good. Oh, yeah, catch. And that's how Webpack is really helpful. Awesome. Yeah. And it's optimized because we call this when we just going to print Webpack. So that's why it has printed only webpack.js. So it optimizes the code as well. So if we say something where a is equal to 10 and say sum is equal to constant sum is equal to a plus 20, we'll see how it optimizes. Yes, awesome. Yeah. So you can see that like the Webpack optimizes the code lot. So it does static code analysis, all those things. And if you want to run, we can say node dist and execute our code and see. Node dist and main.js. Yeah. So we can see our output. So without even configuring anything, we just install Webpack and we can able to see like unused code. So if I'm not going to use this, I'm not going to call and execute Webpack. So we can see the straight away Webpack comes into action, and it's not going to generate the code for you because this is not called, which means it is unused. So it got removed. So thanks to who like helped me, like I actually they didn't it didn't strike in my mind. So unused code has been removed. So we can see the straight away how really it helpful. And if you make any syntax error also, this Webpack compilation will fail. Okay, so Webpack is a very awesome and intelligent tool. It will help us in a lot of functionality. Okay, so now let's write some dependencies. So we will add Webpack and we'll add Lodash. So and add. Okay, so now we are adding in the dev dependencies. So yeah, so we have added Lodash, and we will be importing this in the index.js Lodash. So now we are importing a external library Lodash, and we will write some code, a real code, a DOM code, and see like how it works. And we have written a function, and we will say like, we call this function and execute. This is simple. It's just a function. It creates an element and it uses a Lodash and it joins, and then it's going to happen. So it's as simple as that, right? So we will call this, and meanwhile we will write some HTML as well in this. Currently we are not going to generate HTML. So yeah, scripts. So later stage we will see how to automate this as well. So we need not to add main every time. Okay. So I'm going to run Webpack. Yeah. So currently there is an error stating that mode is not set. So by default, Webpack assumes production. So it will optimize for production mode. So we can have a separate configuration for development as well production. So if you see, this is a compressed, uglified, all the optimization which is done for production mode. So if you see, Webpack has added some codes as well to optimize for caching, a lot of things. So this is a boilerplate Webpack generally adds. Even though your code is very small, this is a boilerplate will be always added to your source code. But that is required for optimization, how we are going to load files. So all those boilerplate code is required is added there, right? So now we will execute this code and see. Yeah. So now did I make any mistake? I call a create element, I return, and it is going to happen. So this is there, and source is main.js. So main.js is called.
Below the body, you can put the scripter.
Yeah, I'll put a bow.
Below the body.
I'll put a bow in the head. After body loads. No, it should not be a problem, right? Did I make some mistake? Okay. Okay. Okay, we'll do a other technique. We'll do a differency. Because mostly we work in React, so we don't work in this particular area. That's DOM. So I have to add main. Should not be a problem. We'll see our generated code is there or not. Okay, we'll try to solve this problem, and meanwhile we'll come back to this. So let's write this code. Okay, and run. Okay, okay. So till now we are see without configuration how we are able to create a Webpack. So now we will be writing a Webpack config. So we will be creating a Webpack config file, which will be helpful to optimize certain things. There we can easily debug. Webpack.config.js. Okay, and it uses common JS module. So we'll be requiring a path. We'll execute that code now, so it will work. So then I'll try to add certain configuration. So these are the very basic configuration of Webpack. So now we say mode is development, and we have an entry index. We have an index file, entry source index, and we have an output. So if we say like output file has to be generated in this bundle, and now we are saying mode is development. So we have given the mode, and then we have a path and resolve. Okay. Then we add something in the script here in scripts, and then we say build. Here we say Webpack. Okay. So now we say instead of yarn Webpack, because now we are not going to take default, but default will be webpack.config.js, so we need not to bother about that. So now we say yarn build. So now the mode is development. Okay, no, yeah. This is set, still I face some problem. Is it cached or?
I think because of the file unsafe.
Okay. I don't know why I face this problem. It should work. There's no issues. Okay. I delete this. Yeah, build. So yeah, now it's fine. It was cached. Okay, now index.bundle. So now if you see, previously we saw it was compressed for the production mode. So it was uglified. It was very difficult to debug. So now we will search our thing. Okay. Instead of Webpack, we will use search hello. Yeah, so our code is here. Previously it was cached, so that's why it was not working. Now it's fine. So if you see now it is, we have given index.bundle.js. Okay, so if you see our config file, we are saying output should be the name, which is your index.js, and we are adding the suffix as bundle.js. So you can add any name you want, so that you make sure that how do you see the generated files. And mode is development now, so optimization is not done in terms of production, but all your unused codes, all those things, always Webpack will take care. So now we go to index.js instead of main. So now we try to load this index.bundle. We have deferred it. Now we'll execute this. Wow. So we can see our files got generated, and we can see the output. So previous one, it was cached. Somehow the file was not saved, or something went wrong. But now you can see the file has been generated, and we can see the output in the browser. And it is the bundle got generated, and we can see our Lodash is also there. That's why this file is too huge. And if you see our terminal, so you can see what are the files got generated, right? So index and Lodash. Any questions still here? Because from now we'll be going a little bit more advanced. Okay, I assume that everyone is clear. Since it's hands-on session, so we can always revisit like. So I'm going to create another file, something called another index.js. Okay, so there also we will try to load the same function, but we will rename the function because Webpack will optimize it, right? So let's call as get component, and we'll call the component here. And instead of hello Webpack, we'll say hello frontend. Okay, so we are loading this Lodash here as well, and we have a Lodash here as well, right? So now we go to Webpack config instead of single entry point, because now we are talking about code splitting. So we will say like how we are splitting the code based on the entry point. So /src/ so another index. Index.js. Okay, I think I spelled it correctly. Okay, So if I execute yarn webpack, so any idea like what is going to happen here? Please feel free to have a discussion because here we will see a lot of optimization.
It will convert a single bundle file, might.
Let's see. Okay, I did a yarn build. So see, because this is kind of, we did in the entry, we did a multiple entry. So we say index and we say that another index. So there are currently 2 files. So if you have very control over your application, so through entry itself, you can able to split your code into multiple files, and that multiple files can be loaded in parallel, because if you see web application will contains of hundreds of files, right? So you can't always compress into one single file with one bundle and load it to the client. So what will happen is, if the client closes in the login itself, you are unnecessarily sending a lot of codes to the home page itself. So you can split the code using routes as well. But
Modules. Okay.
yeah, so now we are splitting based on the code how we are going to write. So how user is going to use our application. So based on that, right? So I have 2 files. Now I say like I want to bundle 2. But there is one, and since we have write a configuration, that name will be taken from the file itself. So we see 2 bundles, right? So bundles have been generated. So now there is a major problem. If you see each bundle size, 214 and 222 bytes, right? So our code is small, but the size is huge, right? So what happens is, if you see the bundle, we'll search for Lodash. So Lodash is taken from the node module, and you see that Lodash code is added here in another bundle.js as well as in index bundle.js. Okay, because we have added a dependency in both the files. So each file doesn't know each other that this is a dependency is there. And even Webpack doesn't know that, because we have generated 2 different files. Webpack doesn't know that Lodash is there, and I'm going to optimize this by default. So we have to say to the Webpack that there is some common codes present in the across the files. So I want to optimize that, right? So I'm going to split the common code, but I'm not going to say which code is a common to Webpack. I'm just going to add some sort of optimization in the Webpack. So I added a small code saying that optimization, and I use a plugin called chunks plugin, which is a default of Webpack. And I said chunks all. I didn't mention anything saying that Lodash is a library, try to optimize that or try to optimize this. I didn't do anything here, right? So I'm going to execute the code here, yarn build, and you can see some magic happens with Webpack. I'll delete this because it might be cached. Okay, webpack.config. So I don't want this anywhere. Okay, let it be there. And I'm going to say most of the problem happens is because of not saving files. So it's saved. Yeah. So now I'm going to run the code. Yarn build. Yeah. Okay. You've seen there is a difference there, right? In even the terminal as well as in the disk folder. Can you guys figure out what is the difference? The code is same. I just added a small optimization here. So we see the same another one. Yeah. Go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, we found vendors node module Lodash. We created a separate file for that.
Yeah. And yes. So this vendor module is separated it out, and which will be required by the Webpack now. So we can search for Lodash. So now it will be imported via Webpack. So which means it. So now we have created a separate file. Now you can load the vendor module before itself, then the index and another bundle, so that when others are loaded, so this is already present there and it is cached, so that it need not to be repeatedly loaded again and again. So which means we have taken a common code out and we have created a separate module, and then we are added to the Webpack. So we didn't wrote any logic, we just wrote a small configuration, and with that it helped to remove the duplicate code. You could have seen how much KBs would have been saved because of this. And we need not to manually remove the unused code. So Webpack handles it for us. Okay. So we have seen currently multiple entry, and then we have done an optimization using chunk. Okay. So now there is most of the bigger web application. If you see, if you click a button, then only you will load a modal, or you will do something else. Okay. Until that button is clicked, the particular code will never get executed. So there will be multiple actions in the user web application. Only based on that action, that particular logic or that particular model or that particular thing has to get executed. So do we want to bundle that and added it and wait till the user gets does that event, or some manual based on some custom event you want to load the model or not, right? So in that case, we can able to dynamically load a model, right? So Webpack has the provision for that as well. That is called dynamic import. Okay. So what does dynamic import does, right? So I'm just changing the code a little bit. Okay. So now we don't require this another index. So I'm going to remove this multiple entry, because most of the time we won't be using multiple entry. We'll be breaking based on routes. Okay. So now we will change our index.js instead of adding directly as a dependency. So Webpack knows it before. Now it doesn't know like it is going to get the dependency this way. I'm going to change a little bit of code here. Okay. So I'm going to return. Okay, I'll just paste the code for the save time. If anyone has any understanding in this problem, I'll just explain this code, how it works. So dynamic imports always will return a promise. Okay, so this when this function gets called, you will return an import, which this is a configuration name you have to give, Webpack chunk name, and we say load hash, and this load hash has to get loaded based on dynamically, not at the time when it is getting loaded. So when this gets loaded, then you'll get a value from that, and then you create same element, and then you return. You call this, and then this component gets loaded, right? Any confusion on this code? Because it's the same code. Only thing is that instead of importing directly, here we are not going to import directly. We are going to get called. When this function is get called, then only this particular load hash is going to get loaded, right? So I'm going to delete others as well. Okay. So I'm going to save the file to avoid confusion. This is also saved. So I didn't wrote any code to handle here. Okay. So I'm just run yarn build. Okay. So if you see this index.bundle.js, we can search for Lodash. Okay. So now it will, the way it imports will be different. It will handle dynamically and then it adds codes. We can execute and see as well. Index.html to check whether this works or not. HTML. Okay. So we have code. Yeah, to check whether this is a proper code, we'll test it. Hello test. To compile it again. Yeah. So now you can see this is getting loaded dynamically on asynchronously on demand. So it's not going to get there. Currently, we can't test it. We can have a button to test this as well. So that I'll show it in the React code. So how it gets dynamically loaded here. Okay. So now we have seen code splitting into 3 different categories. The first one was having a multiple entry. So you can have multiple entries and you can able to bundle it and then you can able to do route-based loading or whatever the way you want to load. Then we say optimization using split chunk plugin. So this plugin and loader, I'll come to discussion later, like why we use that. So here what it does is it removes a common code and puts in one particular bundle, and then it gets called. And third optimization is like dynamic loading. So this way we can able to make our code leaner, and then we are bundling it intelligently. So whenever it is required, then only this particular code is going to get to the client, until and unless based on the user action or some custom events, else this code will never reach the client. So this sort of optimization we can do in Webpack. So now we have this Webpack config, and this is for dev. So how do we do for prod, right? So we can have another Webpack file. So you can have multiple webpack.config, so that we need not to write mode is equal to development code and then do certain things. So I'm going to use prod. So code will be same, only difference will be if I remove mode, by default it will go to the prod. Okay. So now in my package.json, I'm going to give an entry for prod. So prod I say Webpack, and I given a different config here. So now we will be executing prod and see like how it worked before. Now you can see the difference as well in the size. Instead of yarn build, we will be running prod. Okay, so if you see the mode is not set, so by default it went to prod. And if you see the bundle size, previously it was some 222 KB or something. So now if you see the bundle size is drastically reduced. And if you see the code as well, it is highly compressed. So it is highly optimized code, and always better to have a separate config for dev and separate config for prod, so that you are very clear about what went into dev. Because dev you want to debug, you want to add a lot of other code, you don't want to drop the console or a debugger or something. Whereas in prod, all those things has to get resolved. So you can write a separate configuration for prod and separate configuration for dev, and add an entry file to the scripts in the package. Based on that, you can do this. Any questions till now?
Hello.
Yeah.
So as we're discussing in the chat, so in this case, like, can you open that index.js, please?
Yes.
Yeah. Because this line number 2 is returning a promise. So I guess so. This becomes the async process, like when we load the page index.html, so it don't get stuck. It will load dynamically, right?
Yes.
Correct?
Yes.
Okay. I'm just making sure. Thank you.
Yeah. So you can do optimization there as well. While loading, you can I added a kind of defer and pre-cache, preload and prefetch, so
Yeah.
that you can decide how exactly you want to load. So that comes under the prefetching and preloading, like when you want to load. So that optimization also you can do it. So that will effectively improve the performance of your web app.
Yeah, I guess so. If I remove the defer, then also it will load asynchronously.
Yeah, here it will load.
Yeah.
But the vendor file, which is this lodash, if you
Yeah.
want to load, then so at the starting of your application, or when your CPU is idle or parallel you want to load, that also you can able to decide. So that is using your prefetch and precache.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
Hello, Mohan. Like, how this 486 bundle created? Is it because of production?
Yeah, it's because of production optimization. We won't do anything in that. But
Like, is it required for the product production bundle to run, or it's like a dummy?
it's dummy. I think it creates by itself the number. We can put in another entry point and see how it is giving here in production.
So slash.
Sorry. Yeah, Webpack will give us a error as well. Yeah,
Yeah,
I think it's cached.
maybe one more question about the differ. The differ is actually deferring the execution of the index.js, but index.js will still be downloaded at the very top of the HTML parsing, right?
Yeah, differ works this way. If you have something like this, instead of differ, you are loading something else, XYZ. So XYZ will start loading before this index bundle got loaded. So it won't stop your execution flow. So it can load later. So we are deferring it to later when other things get loaded.
Oh,
So it's
okay.
not in urgent.
Differ is going to defer the download of that file that you are
Yes.
looking at right now.
Yep.
But the second file is actually going to be downloaded as soon as the parser arrives at this point, right?
It might not be. So differ will. So generally what happens when you put a script tag directly, so it will stop all the process and it will download this, gets completed, and then only it goes for next file.
Okay. Okay.
Okay. But differ will differ at later stage. So
Okay.
till your DOM ready, or I think till the DOM gets ready, or when the CPU gets idle, this will get picked up. So we have as far as I remember, in HTTP1, you can make a 6 parallel HTTP calls. And in HTTP2, there are some sort increase the number. So there will be a bottleneck if you load more than 6 files in parallel. So your files will get stuck. It might not complete as soon as possible. So we defer it during that time.
And moreover, the first exchanges between the server and the client is limited to, I think, 14 kilobytes. So this is also another limit to take into consideration when you want to optimize for the initial download too. Yes.
I'm not sure, because we used to load a very huge file before Webpack. One particular JS file compressed, all the files get compressed into one particular index and load. Only problem is your time gets increased, download time gets increased. And with the help of Webpack, you can even optimize and you can control how much size of your bundles as well. So there is a bundle analyzer tool is there. With the bundle analyzer tool, you can define like what is causing the increase in the time. So what are the unnecessary other libraries we are loading, which we are not using at that particular point of time. So we can able to control that. But as such, I don't see a limitation of 14 KB or something. I'm not sure if someone is the call no, because I haven't crossed that particular situation.
It's just that currently we don't have a lot of content in the HTML. We don't have any CSS. We don't have any other tag. So downloading just a script may not have lead to problems, but it's just that we don't currently have a lot of content.
Yeah, so this particular HTML will get delivered. Mostly in HTML file won't have a lot of content because we generate dynamically through JavaScript. So through that, Webpack optimize that. Even if the HTML is big, only it will, if the network is slow, it will take time for the client things to get rendered in the client system.
Oh yeah, because this is currently a purely client-side application, but somehow we need to put some content for the SEO. You see.
Yeah, through meta tag.
Okay, thank you very much.
Sure. Okay, so now we have written a easy normal JavaScript. So now we can remove this index.js, and in our Webpack config we have an entry and an optimization. So now we will create a CSS file because we haven't done any CSS now. So we'll write a small CSS index.css, and I say body background color, I say red. Okay, so now I'm going to use here, I think import, how to import CSS. I think directly we can import, I think, right? Okay, so I import CSS, and then I simply say console.log. CSS. So I have added a CSS file. I'm importing the CSS. This is the right way to import a CSS. Okay, let's see. So I'm going to run yarn build. This is the right one, yarn build. Okay, so there is an error, right? You can see. So what is the error? It says, do you mean index.css? So what Webpack does is Webpack will know the extension of JavaScript, JS, and your HTML and your JSON. So other than your any extension, Webpack doesn't understand. So what has to be done with this? For example, style loader, your less or anything you write, Webpack cannot understand. Even your basic CSS, Webpack cannot understand. Okay, so we have to say to Webpack, if there is .css as added as a dependency, what has to be done for particular this file, right? So we are going to come to the concept called loader. So what loader is, loader says to Webpack, if this comes, how you want to handle this particular file, right? So for that, we are going to add two particular loaders. I'm going to add loaders. So CSS loader and style loader I've added as a, it should be added as a dev dependency. Sorry. Yeah.
Mohan, we'll wrap up within the next 10 minutes.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. So we'll load only the CSS and thing. The next session or whenever we get time, we can talk about React. Okay. So I'm going to talk about loader here. So in loader, we are going to write a small script to say to show to the Webpack that yeah, so this is how this is a loader. We say it has object and it has a rule, so you can have multiple rules, and it says that .css. Whenever you go for this particular extension, use this loader. So this loader has to be added in the sequence. So first it has to be CSS loader. So what CSS loader does, it picks all the CSS, okay, and what style loader does, it adds the CSS to the head of the index.html or in the particular way. So I'm going to delete this. So we have added a loader and we have added a CSS, and then we will delete this, and we have index and CSS. So we have removed all other dependencies. So I'm going to do a yarn build. There is some issues. One second.
And Webpack file not saved.
Sorry.
Webpack file not saved. Webpack configuration.
Generally, work on not to save. Yeah. Okay. So now it's compiled, and yeah. So now we'll execute and see. Yeah, if you see the background color is changed, and now we can change this other color as well to see whether it is there or not. So now we have to execute again. To resolve this, we will use okay, so now we can see like we have added a loader. We have introduced a new thing called loader, and with the help of loader, we have asked Webpack how a particular CSS to get handled. If you use style, if you use less, you have to add this less loader to convert less into CSS, and then CSS loader and style loader will come into picture. Now a quick thing, like I want to show if you have written some ES6 functionality. So test is equal to arrow function. Result. Okay, I'm just going to call this test. Yeah, so I'm going to build this quickly. So the unbuild, and if you open and if we search our result, and if you see this, so yeah, if you see this particular arrow function has been not text itself, it has came directly, and assume that 1 year back or 2 years back this arrow function is not supported across multiple browsers, so you want to convert ES6 to ES5. So quickly we can able to add a particular loader, Babel core, Babel preset. So I'll show you that difference as well. So this particular Babel loader is for the cross-browser functionality, so that it converts into ES5 or most of the ES6 code, and then so that we need not to bother about cross-function functional capability. And I'm just giving a small example of this particular arrow function. That you can use other things as well. Okay. So added a module. I'm going to add a module. We have multiple rule sets, right? So it supports this as well. So whenever there is a JS, I say use preset loader, and I'm going to add new file called Babel RC. Babel RC. Okay. So Babel RC, I'm just going to add a preset saying that for use that ES6 to ES5 environment, and I'm going to build this again. Okay, so build is done. So now if you go to our index bundle.js, we search with the result. Yeah, if you see that arrow function gets converted into the normal function. So by this way, you can use all the functionalities of the latest ES6, and even with the experimental functionalities also. There is a Babel configuration. You can always use separate Babel configuration to support which function to use and which polyfill to use, which polyfill not to use, so that you can try to optimize in the polyfill as well. Unnecessary, you need not to load all the Babel polyfills. So you can choose and pick which polyfill you want to get used to it for this execution. Okay, so we have added this loader. So we'll be quickly adding a small plugin. So I'll just explain that. So I think that will be the final thing. So we'll be adding a new HTML plugin, because till now we are always writing our HTML on our own. So I'm going to delete this. Okay. So I'm going to add this plugin. So this plugin is added. Okay, now I say, so plugin always has to get required at the top, whereas loader is by default, you will get it. and you have to add the plugin this way. So this is the syntax for plugin. I'm going to remove, and I'm going to write one index.html. .html. Okay. So HTML, and I set title web. Okay. So what I did, I quickly added a plugin, and with plugin I added a index.html, and I'm going to execute now. So by default, if you see, the index.html got generated, and the index file is added by bundle is added by itself. We didn't touch it. So from now we need not to add manually of our own. And using Webpack dev server, we can able to continuously code, and Webpack dev server will be default building for the development mode. So we have covered entry and mode, and we have covered the loaders, how to use loaders. There will be multiple loaders as well. For example, JSX, which is not supported supported by default for React. So that load we can use Babel preset React loader to support that, and we use plugin which generates our index.html by default. We have seen an output, we have seen an optimization. Till more, what are the other things we can cover in the other session is like the Webpack bundle analyzer, and how we can able to create a React environment using Webpack rather than using create React app. Because there are a lot of things added to create React app, but if you know like how to do that, you can do a lot of optimization by yourself, and you can efficiently, and you can able to optimize a lot of codes there. Any questions till now?
We have about a minute left, Mohan.
Okay,
So
then quickly I'll add one small thing. Any questions? Questions we have separate time, or?
we wrap up usually within the session. So if you're taking questions now, we can have another 2 minutes to take questions.
Yeah.
Mohan, I have a question.
Yeah.
Yeah, like I have been working as an Angular developer for the past 2 years. I didn't get any chance or demand to learn Webpack because the Angular does this Webpack configuration during the build time itself. Then why I need to learn this Webpack? What is the use actually?
So that is actually true for even React developers also. If you ask for React developers or even JavaScript developers, now there are very few. So most of the time, this configurations comes with default. Even the React developers, you see, they will say like create React app, the app name. By default, it gets generated, and just you run yarn start. So you never know that Webpack was part of it. I think Angular, I think there is a separate bundler for Angular as well. I'm not sure, but you can use Webpack for Angular as well. And if you want to just do a basic application, a small like 5-screen application and one single small application, you need not to have a Webpack. When you talk about a huge scale like Jira, you say like with thousands of screens, and there will be a lot of duplicates, and you want to optimize it, you want to effectively run the optimization, then you have to know the internals of Webpack. So as an I haven't worked in Angular a little bit. Even with React also, I never used Webpack before. But after joining Atlassian, I came to know the importance of Webpack. And this Webpack is independent, whether it's Angular or React or Vue. I think Vue also Webpack also supports Vue. So now it becomes like even front-end developers has to know Webpack and how to optimize it, if there is an issue, how to debug as well.
Okay, thank you.
Hey Mohan, Prabhu here. I just wanted to ask you what, can you explain the order of loaders once again?
Okay, order of loaders will go from left to right. Sorry, where is that order of loaders? Yeah, from right to left. So first CSS loader will pick, and after that style loader. If you interchange, it won't work properly.
Got it. Thank you.
Okay, and quickly I just add this part. So Webpack dev server I added as a dependency. I just executed this particular code, and yeah, we will, because this is very important, Webpack dev server for hard reloading. So I have a serve Webpack serve. That's it, and I say -, open. My default browser will get opened. So instead of so you can see my Webpack dev server is there. Yeah, it's there. I have saved this. Yeah. Instead of running dev, I'll run a start. Yeah, start. So compile successfully, and I think it says I'm using it. I don't know where I use it. Yeah, I use it actually. One second. Yeah. So this can be used for development purpose. So by default, your thing gets added, and you need not to every time restart your web server. So you can just go to your source code and keep on changing it, and say like in index.js I want gray. Okay. By default, Webpack build it, and through hard reloading, you can see the gray is already there. So this will be very helpful for a development purpose. There is one small tips I'll give, like you need not to go to your source code as well. You can go to your inspect element and in source, okay, add folder to your workspace. There you can add your yeah, you can add your source code. Suppose this is the one, you select it. So allow it. So now open this file and say index and say red and just save it. Okay, so Webpack compiles there and you get it here. So you can code in your browser itself. You save it and you can see it's changed, right? So this will help if you're in smaller application. This will help very well.
So Mohan, we are running short on time, so
yeah, I'm done.
Yeah. Thank you. If you would like to leave any closing notes.
Yeah, I can share my, after this talk, I can share my email.
Slides.
If any slides, yeah, I'll share the
Yes.
slides as well.
Okay. If it's possible, where can people reach you if they have anything to clear, or I mean your Twitter or something like available to reach?
Yeah, I'll share it. This one. Sorry, I didn't see any of the chats because my screen is shared. That's why I'm
No
seeing all
worries.
this. Right.
Okay. So you can share the details in the chat itself, so people can reach out to you if they need to connect with you later on.
Sure. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Mohan. It was a wonderful session.
Thank you.
So, next we have a talk on Woo. So we have been, really looking forward to have speakers in Woo, and I believe we've had only one speaker so far, throughout the course of the community monthly meetups that we are having. So really excited to have Shiva Mishra with us, who will be talking to us about advanced Vue concepts. So Shivam, the stage is yours. And just one note I would like to make, Skanda is not available. So we will not be having the third session today regarding the PWA. So sorry for that. We'll try to, make it available in the next meetup also. Thank you so much.
Hi everyone. Can you enable screen sharing? I think I don't have access to it.
Yes, Shivam, just give me a minute. I'm just enabling screen sharing for you.
Sure.
Okay, can you check now? You should be able to share your screen.
Okay. Yep. I'll share the entire screen. Here we go. Okay. So hi everyone. My name is Shivam. I'm a front-end engineer at DeepSource, and today we'll talk about some advanced Vue concepts. So before we begin, I've been writing Vue for over a year now. For that, I was used to writing a lot of vanilla JavaScript, building SP apps there. I work at DeepSource. At DeepSource, we are basically a code quality company, so we ensure bad code does not reach your code base. It's stopped at PR levels. And at DeepSource, I am part of the front end team. We are building the next generation of our platform. So we are going live with that in a couple of months. It's been under development for like over a year now. So that's about it. That's about my role. So yes, I write Vue apps. The other thing I do is I'm the maintainer of a very popular charting library called Frappe Charts. So if you use Chart.js, it's very similar, except it uses SVG and it's way more lightweight. So I maintain that on my weekends. So that's one other thing. So let's talk about Vue. So when you talk about Vue, right, if we go to a very fundamental level, Vue provides us a few abstraction hierarchies, right? That are the options available for you to make apps with. So the first and the most foremost is you make components. Pretty cool. The next thing is you do mixins. And the last form of making an abstraction is a directive. So, without further ado, we'll directly jump into components, and we'll see how we actually build a component. So even though this talk is titled advanced, it just scratches the surface of what all of these actually do. But if you want something more advanced, I have linked to another talk of mine, which I gave recently at Vue Bangalore, which is a very comprehensive deep dive into how to make better components and how to organize your code base better. So anyway, let's jump into it. So let's talk about components, right? So components is essentially the primary form of code reuse that is offered by Vue. So if you look at any Vue, the building blocks of any Vue application, it's basically a component. And a component is nothing but a Vue instance in itself, right? So whatever options you pass to new Vue, you can pass into the component and it'll start working. Like barring a few options, of course, but most of the options that you pass to new Vue can be passed to a component itself. And what the first 2 points imply is that your app is essentially a nested list of your components, right? And what does a component do? To put it very simply, it accepts props, manages its state, and it emits events. That's about it. And when I say manages the state, I mean its behavior, how it visually looks, and how it reacts to change in the current state. So this is what basically a component is. And I'm sure most of you probably know already. If you have dived into Vue even a little bit, you probably know all this. But anyway, let's just talk about the basic structure of component before we dive deeper. So the basic structure of components is very simple. You have a template. That is the markup that the entire component interacts with. Then you have the script. The script is basically all the JavaScript that will be running. This is where you actually declare the logic, the business logic of your Vue component. And obviously you have styles, and styles can be scoped, non-scoped. That is, does it apply only to the component? Can it be applied globally? Is it CSS, SCSS? All that thing can be included in the style. If you take a look closer to the script itself, you can provide the name of the component. Props are the data data points that are received from its parents. Then we have data function, which is essentially the data that is retained by on its own. That is, it hosts on its own data, and the methods that are used to, alter the data or do certain things like emit an event, etc. And then computed events, as the names, computed methods, as the name suggests, it's methods that derive the value from the existing data. So it's a reactive proxy for all your data. So let's say you want to count the percentage. So you have like completed upon total, and you can return the value as percentage. So you can create a computed method for that, and it can be accessed as a property. So again, this is something that's probably most of you must be already be aware of. So let's look at a button component, right? And this is where we get into the practice of that template, the structure of the component. So again, let's see, we have the template, which has a button and a slot. And on click of the template, if you look at the second line, on click of the template, we run this click function, right? Let's look at the script. It has the methods, and method is simply on click method. The rest is not included because we don't need it. So on click, it emits a click event. And then we obviously have a style. So padding, border radius, standard CSS. Now, if you actually use this button, every time you click this button, this on click event is triggered and the event is emitted. And you can see the counter here. So I'm clicking it and the click event is emitted. So this component is wrapping the click event, is listening to the click event that is emitted by this entire component. And that is just logged there. So we set this, we click and you see click event is emitted. So that's pretty straightforward. Now, of course, we all know we can write a button component. Let's say we can write an input component and together we can make a sign up form. So sure, cool. There's another concept that's recently getting popular. It's called renderless components. So renderless components are basically components with just logic and no markup or rendering of its own. So it does not have opinions on style. And you may have often faced, right, that you jump into building a view application or any application for that matter. And let's say you import an external library with, let's say, a data table library, right, or a charting library. And you see that the style of those libraries does not quite match your, like, the overall design of your application. And sure, you can update it with CSS hacks, writing important and everything, but it's still hacky in its essence. And renderless component sort of solves that and also provides a way of abstracting more logic to be reused other places. But in a gist, a renderless component is a component that does not render any of its own HTML, hence the name renderless. It was popularized by the authors of Tailwind, Adam Wathan. So what a renderless component does is only manages states and behaviors, and it exposes a single scope slot. And a single scope slot is nothing but a slot with a context. That's about it. And what that allows us is that the markup is now controlled by you. So the state and behavior you get to import from other places, and the markup is owned by you. So what happens is the opinions on how the component behaves and looks is up to you. And it renders exactly what you pass into it without any extra elements. So it does not modify your component in any way. So if you want to, let's say, build a simple renderless toggle, it'll look something like this. So let's say we start off with the methods. We have a set on method, we have a set off method, we have a toggle method. Set on will set the state to true, set off will set the state to false, the toggle will set the state to not state. So that is toggles, right? Now you look at this, you have a render function, right? So previously I mentioned you need templates to actually render the markup, right? But you can also programmatically render markup within your script. So you don't actually have to write the entire template tag itself. You can actually programmatically render. So the render is essentially called when Vue actually wants to render. The name itself says it. So if you look closely into the function, what we do is we take the default scope slot and we pass in the context and we return it, right? So if you look at this line, this is the default scope slot, and then we pass this context. This context is on, whether this is on or not. So this is this dot state. Set on is the set on function, set off is the set off function, toggle is the toggle function, right? So if you go back a few steps, so again, it does not have any of its own HTML. It has a single scope slot and manages the state and behavior itself. So this by definition is a renderless component, right? We have on, set off, toggle, right? If you want to see this in practice, this is probably a good example for it. So this toggle component is imported here. So if you see, this is the toggle component and the slot scope is present here, which is on and off, and which is the on, that is the current state, set on and set off. Now this scope slot, this context is now used here. And now what you can do is within this markup, you can use the context variable as you wish. So what we have is a toggle on button, toggle off button. At click, we set it on, and the click of toggle off, we set it off. And we have a v-if conditional rendering. So v-if on, it's on, v-else, it's off. And if you see this in practice, yep, it's working. So what we have done is we have encapsulated this behavior, and we can style it as we want. So if you want this button to be a link, you can have that. If you want this button to have a different color, you can have that. The hover state to change, you can have that, because the button is now controlled to you. If you want this to not be a button, you want it to be something else, let's say like a div with a value of certain kind, sure, you can have that. You want to change this from click to hover, you can do that. So this is what a renderless component allows you to do. Now, this has become recently very popular, and the authors of Tailwind have also built a project called Headless UI. It's essentially a UI library, and it's all headless components, so you can use it for both React and Vue, and it's very neat. I just recently tried it for a pet project, and it works great. This is not the only renderless component out there in the wild. There's also a renderless component, renderless rich text editor called TipTap. So you can take a look at it later. Now, next thing we jump onto is called mixins, right? So mixins is in itself is not a new concept or something esoteric to Vue. So mixins as a design pattern have existed for long. If you have been in the front-end space for a while, you must have used SCS as mixins. So mixins are nothing but a piece of code or a piece of configuration that mixes with the host configuration. So for Vue specifically, it's a flexible way to distribute reusable functionality, right? And a mixin object is very similar in its structure to a component itself. And it's obvious because you want that mixin to be mixed in the host component. So let's again take an example for that. So you have a modal component, right? And if you look at this modal component, it's a very straightforward component. You have title and action label as props. You have a trigger action. So on button click, you trigger the action, and the trigger action essentially just emits success. That's about it. That's very simple, right? We also have a toggle option, because on click of the model, on click of the button, we want the model to show up, right? So we have that very similar to the previous example. So on click, we have toggle show, and toggle show does nothing but toggle the actual model. Fairly straightforward. Now, if you look at this piece of code, right, we have data, which returns is showing false. And then we have method, which is a toggle show method, which toggles the entire thing, right? If you look at this piece of code, just keep this in mind, right? Next, let's try to build a tooltip component, okay? So again, the structure of this tooltip component is pretty same. Instead of, so we have mouse over here, and we have toggle show instead of click in the previous example, and we have a v-if here again. Let's assume the styling and the markup and the layout is handled by itself. But if you look at this piece of code, right, you have data, return is showing false, and then toggle is showing is not is showing. Does it look familiar? Yes, it's the same thing that we actually wrote in the modal component, right? Now, you don't want to be repeating such logic again and again across your components, simply because if you want to change the logic somewhere in the future, you'll have to change it everywhere. Of course, this is a very simple example, but I'll give you an example of a more complicated version as well. And the other thing is that it just increases the amount of code base that you're, the footprint of your code base, basically. So what we can do is we can create something called as a mixin. So let's say this is the mixin. We have data, we have methods. As you recall, it's exactly what properties this view component will take in. We have the is showing false, and we have the toggle function. And what you can do is you can create a mixin let's say toggle.js file somewhere in your mixins folder in your Vue code base. And then you can refactor your modal and tooltip. You first import the toggle and then add it as a mixin. So just register it, mixins is toggle. You can of course register mixins globally and don't have to import it everywhere. But for the sake of brevity, let's just assume we have to import it. So mixins, and we have toggle. And if you notice, the rest of the function remains as it is. And all the options from the toggle gets mixed with this host component. And similarly, we can change the implementation for tooltip. And if you see, it's just props, it's accept the props and mixins. Of course, the template will be there. But by and large, this is how you actually abstract your code base with mixins. Now, this is a very, very simple example, but in practice, mixins are very useful, especially for data fetching and your local storage usage, etc. So let's build a mixin for data fetching, right? And what do we want to accomplish with this mixin? Is that let's assume that any function, any component that uses this mixin should have a fetch method. Let's assume that. And what the mixin should do is search for that fetch method and run it. What this also should provide is that we need to find if the fetch command is running successful or error. So we need small utilities to check the state of the fetch, right? Now, maybe the object syntax for this fetch will be something like this. It has a is loading function, is success function, is a error function. We have a loading is set to false and error is null. And the way the fetch logic will work is that it'll try to fetch the code. And if there is an error, it'll log the error. If this and set the loading to false, which was initially set to true. So this is where we run the fetch code, right? Pretty simple. Now the way to create a mixin for this is straightforward. We first have data and created. So on created, that means on creation of this method, on creation of this component, the created is run. And the data is just the current data that this component or mixin in this case holds. Now, if you look at the fetch, we have the loading and error state. That is, loading is a Boolean false. Error is null. If there is an error, it will hold the error value. We have is loading, which checks whether the current loading is true or not. So it just returns it. Is success, it checks if the loading is false and there is no error, that means it's successful. And if the error is not null, that means it's errored. So all these are clean utilities that we can use. And that was our fetch. Now, if you look at created, we check if in the current options, if the current options is present, and if in the current options there is fetch, which is a function or not, right? If it is a function and if it's available, we call this with this as the context. And if there is an error, we log it. It's pretty straightforward. Now, what you have actually done is abstracted a fetch logic. So anywhere you don't have to rewrite all of this. And what you can do is simply create a fetch method and this will run for you automatically. Another cool trick what we can do is, let's say just before this await, we can actually, after this await, we can log the data to local storage. And what we can do is we can have a cache for us. So before a function fetch call, we'll check if the data is available in local storage or not. If it's available in local storage, we return it, else we make the call. So you can see how we can just keep writing on top of this mixin and make this more sophisticated. It's very useful when you're using Vuex and let's say you have a GraphQL endpoint which updates a Vuex store, let's say a user store, or let's say a product store for an e-commerce site, or whatever example you may wish for. And you can store all the mutations, actions, mutations, the queries and everything within the mixin, and then start reusing this across your components without having to write it again and again. So that's pretty neat. That's mixins for us. Now there are some takeaways for mixins. So one thing is, like, just for recap, it helps you encapsulate some pieces of functionality that you can reuse across your components. The other thing that you need to keep in mind when writing mixins is that your mixin should be pure. That is, it should not modify or change the things outside itself. So if your component, if that, for instance, if we head back to this example, you see the trigger action, right? Your mixin should not actually change this or try to modify something of its own. What this will create unnecessary side effects will also make your mixins tightly coupled, which actually misses the point of having a mixin in the first place. The other thing is merging strategy. Vue itself has its own merging strategy on how a mixin options will be merged with the current component options. And if there is a name conflict, how do you resolve that and everything. You can also create your custom mix in merging strategies, but I strongly recommend against it, because that's somehow you break the mental model for Vue itself, and it's a slippery slope. Once you have custom option strategies, it will start get confusing where which logic applies. Besides, for 99.9% of the time, you won't need a custom strategy. The other thing is that you need to understand that mixins is not the only options, and you can do that with higher order components. Essentially, a component of a higher order that can be inherited by other components, just like class inheritance. I've explained this in detail in the another talk I mentioned at Vue Bangalore. I've set the links for that. But currently, with the scope and purview of this talk, let's not jump into it. But you can mixins are not the only options that are available to you. The next very nice thing about the lowest level of abstraction hierarchy, we have directives. This is a very nice low level access that Vue provides to your elements. So you might have used something like vHTML or vmodel or vbind, so in your template, of course, and all those are nothing but directives. And what directives do is they allow a low level DOM access on the plain elements itself, like on vanilla HTML elements, and you can actually run vanilla JavaScript code and modify the behavior of those HTML elements. You might have used something like button, like a V tooltip. You have two messages. So this is a very popular tooltip library, which is a wrapper for Popper.js. And what this essentially means is that you can actually write custom directives, which will be reusable form of these low-level DOM functions, right? And for writing custom directives, Vue provides a nice set of hooks that are run on the various life cycles of a component event. So first is bind. That is when actually the directive is binded to the element. The next is inserted. That is when the element itself is inserted into the parent DOM. We have update when the element is updated. When the component is updated, we have a hook for that, but this assumes that the child component has not been updated. And we have unbind. Component updated is when the entire component tree is updated, and update is when the element itself is updated and the children have been not. Sorry for that. And lastly, we have unbind. That is when the element itself is removed. We can run few pieces of code that will be run before unbinding the directive. So let's say we want to create an outside click directive, right? I have, let's see the code. We have a toggle button, right? A menu button that runs the toggle function on click. Cool. We have the toggle drop down body itself, which will be toggled based on is open, right? Now, if you look at this particular line, we have something called as v outside click is equal to close, right? This is not something that Vue provides out of the box, and this is a custom directive that we actually built, right? And if you look at the code itself, the toggle does nothing but toggles the function, and the close method just sets the is open to false, right? And we have this component here. So we have menu, we have the drop down body here. It's a neat little drop down. But if you see, I'm clicking outside, and the toggle does not go off, right? So I click menu, sure, it toggles, but it does not toggle off when I'm clicking outside, which is strange because you would expect that behavior from a drop down, right? So what we can do is and this is not the only place where you'll be using such a behavior, right? So for drop downs, we'll have that. For inputs with input selects, we'll have that, right? If you're creating a custom input select. For modals, we'll have that. Let's say if you have a modal which on click of outside, it should actually disable or hide the model, you need that, right? So we need a reusable piece of code that will check if a click that was made is outside the parent, it's outside the target element or not. If it is outside the target element, it needs to run a certain function, which is close in this case, right? So let's actually just dive into the logic of seeing if a click is made outside a function or outside an element or not, right? It's fairly straightforward. We have a function on document click. It will take the click event. It will take the elements in question, that is the parent element to be tested for, and a function to be triggered in case the element contains, in case the click is outside, right? So we fetch the target from the event. So we check if the target is not the element in question here. So that is, let's say we call it the drop down, okay, in this case. So we check if the click target is not the drop down itself. And then we also check that if the click target is not somewhere within the drop down. So let's say home, settings, etc. You don't want if you don't want the drop down to close, or if you don't want the drop down to close when clicking all of this, we can set that, right? So whether it contains or not. And in the case of modal too, right? If in case of a modal, you don't want the drop down to close in case someone is clicking on text in the modal itself, this comes in handy. And if this condition is satisfied, that means we are sure the click is outside the element, and we trigger the function, right? So I hope this is clear. It's fairly straightforward. We check the event target. We check if the drop down and the event target are not the same, or the drop down does not contain the target. And if it's satisfied, we trigger the function. Fairly straightforward. Now let's assume this on document click function is working. Now let's build the directive, right? Previously, I told you we have a bind utility, bind hook. So on bind, we get the element and the binding. So the binding is nothing but the value that was passed after the v on. So we get the close function here. So binding dot value becomes a close function in this case. And we create a handler. So click on document click. We pass the event, which is received from here. We pass the element and we pass the function. So again, we have bind. Binding value is the function. On click, we trigger the on document click function. And then we attach the event listener to the document itself. Now let's also create an unbind function. So let's assume we get the handler from somewhere. Okay, we get the handler from somewhere because the bind and unbind don't share context. And then we remove the event handler from the document. It's fairly straightforward. Now when we piece all of this together, we get something like this. So let's start with the first line. So we have an instances array, which will hold the instance. So since you'll use this outside click directive multiple places, and you have to probably unbind on unmount of a lot of these components. So we'll have an instances array which will hold the handler instances of all the outside click event handlers which we have created. Right, this is our function. We have the bind, we have the unbind. Now what we'll do is in the element data set, we'll use the instances.length and we'll add that to the element data set. So it will get a data hyphen outside hyphen click hyphen index is equal to instances.length. What this will enable is that every element will have a unique outside click index because the instances.length will always be unique. The next thing is the binding we did previously. And what we do now is that the click we created in the previous step, we push it in the instances. So now we know that the current index of the instances is the click that is binded here, right? And instances is available globally to this. So in the unbind, what we can do is we can simply take the element, fetch the outside click index, and remove the handler. So we get the handler from the instances array, we remove it. So remove event listener click handler, and then we remove the handler itself from the instances array to maintain purity of the data. And this is how we do it. So again, quick recap. We bind, get a unique index, bind this, push the handler to a unique index. On unbind, we get that unique index, get the handler, remove the handler, remove the handler itself from both DOM and the instances array. And you can do more things, like you can add events for touch start for mobile devices and everything, and those optimizations can be dealt with later. But loosely speaking, this is the exact plugin that you will need, and this works, right? The way to use it is you simply import it. So import outside click directives from your directory, and then you view.use directory outside click directive, And what this will do is it will register it across view, and you can use it anywhere you want. So let's take an example for this. So this is the same toy drop down we had last time. Again, we have this menu toggle, right? Click, it's working. Now let's see if outside click works or not, right? So moment of truth, we click outside. Sure, it does. So wherever you click outside, it will toggle it off. So that's basically it. Thanks a lot. My email is hey@shivam.dev. These slides are available at advancedview.shivam.dev. Fun fact, these slides are also a view component. So if you look at this slide is all built on view, and it's using a tool called slide.dev, sli.dev. So this is hosted on advanced-view.shivam.dev. So that is where you can see the slides for yourself. Also, shameless plug, my team is hiring for Vue developers. So if you're interested, just hit up careers.deepsource.io. Here are a few links. So first one is the first three are the documentation links. The obvious links, Vue docs is excellent. So refer that. The next is a talk I gave at Vue Bangalore, which let's say is the next step to this talk. So if you enjoyed this talk, understood probably what I said, go ahead and give that talk a view. It's probably the next step that you can look at. A blog about outside click directive, a blog about renderless component. That's about it. Thanks a lot. I'm free to take questions now.
Shivam, that was a good talk. So I have one question.
Sure.
It's related to the emit. So when you emit an event, I saw a certain. So when you emit a success or failure or any custom emit, what is the scope of this emit? Because when you hit a emit click, the scope will be kind of global. And when I see there is a custom emit, somewhere I saw in renderless, somewhere you clicked with the variable, the name, or if that function is present, will be, I saw in that particular scope, the function was there itself so that it can able to listen to that particular event and respond. If that particular event scope is different, so how do you manage this particular scopes?
Cool. Okay. So the event is the emit is bound to the element itself, right? So like I mentioned, the let's jump here. Set this to view. Okay. So let's say this is your view app. Cool. And what your view app will have is like multiple components, right? Like component one is, let's say, V button. We use it. The component two is V card. Component three is V input, right? And everything. And this V button, let's say this is the V button component that we have built. Now this entire thing is a view instance of its own. The V button is a view instance of its own. The V card is a view instance of its own. V input is a view instance of its own, right? And what this entire component is probably in some parent component, which is a view instance of its own. So if you see, this is the hierarchy is it's a tree structure, right? So whenever I add a click event, right, a click listener, add click is equal to, let's say we run a function alert click, right? So if whenever we add this, you must understand the hierarchy is so that since this is the child, the emit can be listened by its parents. So whatever this emit is, it can be listened by its parents and its parent alone. So whenever the emit happens, the scope is limited to the child and the parent itself. And if you want, let's say the parent of this entire thing to listen to the click event, you'll have to pass the emit all over again. So you'll have to create the export default methods, and you can new emit, and you'll have to do this $emit all over again and pass the click event again. So on this, you just do new emit and it'll pass the emit on top again. So this is quite intentional because you don't want these random things to be firing here and there. Besides, limiting the scope of this actually helps in optimizations. But if you want to have a global event emitter, Vue is a great event emitter in itself. So if you want to create a plugin of sorts, so you can actually create a plugin which will be a new Vue instance. So hello is a new Vue instance, right? And you can pass into all the options and whatever you want. So you can do hello.$on, and you can listen to click events. So wherever this hello is used, it will be used as a global event listener.
So we have to manually manage listen and unlisten the events.
Yes, you do have to. So Vue provides a lot of these event emitters for a lot of inputs by default. So if you use a regular button, this click was available on it itself. If it's an input, the input event will be enabled for it and everything. But largely, yeah, you need to do the event management, emitting management yourself.
This will lead to the memory leaks, right? Is there a way to figure out, okay, I have to unlisten to the events because I have listened somewhere else?
Yeah. So these event listeners are bounded to the life cycle of the component itself. So whenever you have a very simple component like this, for instance, right? So this event listeners will actually be unmounted and removed automatically when the component itself is unmounted. So the way to prevent memory leaks, the way Vue does that is first is limits the scope of these events within the component lifecycle itself, within the component parent and child scope itself and its lifecycle itself. So in those two scopings, whenever the child is gone, the emitter is gone. Whenever the like the parent and the child together is gone, the event emitter is gone. So that is how it manages it. So
in one of the places I saw you are triggering a custom event other than click.
Yeah, these are a dummy, but yeah, this click. So let's
go back in the slides as well so that I can read the
okay, sure.
I think the starting few slides itself. Yeah.
You mean in the button component itself?
Yeah, I think I'll open that. Not this. There is some called trigger. You triggered a function which was defined below itself.
Okay. Right. Just let me. It's probably the model component.
Yeah.
Let me find the model component for you. Yep. So yeah, this emit success, right? Yeah.
Yeah. This click trigger action is there, right? The trigger action is a function, right?
Yep,
so you have defined the scope here. Suppose if I would have defined this trigger action somewhere else, somewhere in the component, which is rendered already in the view.
So the other thing is that the template itself is also scoped to this object. So anything that's not present here, right? So this trigger action is actually this dot trigger action. I mean that this is implied here. So the template itself has the context or scope of the component itself. So if a method is not present here, it won't be present here. So even if you want to hook up a global, let's say method to it, you'll have to proxy it via one of these methods. So
I have to pass it here if I want to connect with some other components, if I want to initiate some other component.
So there are ways to do that. You provide the provide inject functionality, or you can just pass a method as a prop. It's totally up to you. But within components, right? If you want to actually, let's say this has the parent of this button has some function that you want to trigger, although not recommended because it makes the components tightly coupled. But you can do that. You can access the parent from here itself using this dot parent, or you can. There's a provide inject API which provides a function down the component hierarchy. So you can, let's say, provide or make available a certain function within the scope of your children, and that can be used in any depth of children. So if you want to go 2-level deep and the children wants to use a function from the parent, they can do that. But again, it has to be like, it will always be scoped within the component lifecycle and the component scope. Like this never becomes a blocker in most of the cases. Like from what we have been writing very complicated Vue applications, and this never becomes a blocker, and it's essentially a safety net to manage that. So the memory management is like pretty robust here in that sense.
Thank you.
Yes.
Hi.
Hi.
I have 2 questions regarding the renderless component.
Sure.
The first one is which component is actually controlling the style of the the scope slots.
Oh, okay.
Because,
Okay.
is it the parent who uses the renderless component, or maybe because yeah.
So it's actually the parent that's controlling the style. So renderless components basically have no opinions of their own. So if you would run this, if I pass, let's say, class background, if pass style background color is, let's say, pink, this will become pink. So all the styling is managed by the component itself. The rendering itself is managed by the parent itself, but all the behavior is encapsulated in the child component.
Oh yeah. So the template you're showing here is the template of the parent, right?
Yeah, it's a separate view file which uses this internally. Yeah. So this is the toggle.view. Let's assume this is the toggle.view, and let's assume this is the parent.view. So in parent.view, we are using toggle. Should have added file names here. Yeah.
Okay. Oh yeah. When you talk about on, set on, and set off, I think you use the term context.
Yeah.
Right? Context is something different from a local variable. So where are those data stored? Where are those context data?
Sure. So the difference between a regular scope slot and a scoped slot is that the scope essentially lets you. So let's say this is the parent component and this is the toggle component, right? So wherever you're using this toggle value, what you can do is this markup can quote unquote peek inside this the scope of this the toggle component, right? So that is the essential idea of scope component. So all these value, right, the state on, set off, and set on and on, and if you want toggle also, always exist within toggle only, within the toggle.view only. But what this allows us is to expose this inside a particular slot only. So this on, set off, whatever is inside toggle, closing toggle can be used, can use this on, set off. But anything else, let's say if I have a line next to it and trying to access this function, it won't be working. So essentially what it does is toggle can expose some part of its methods, data, and whatever you wish to expose as a scope. So that can be accessed here. So that's basically just like a tiny scope leak of sorts. Yeah.
Okay. The fact that you say scope slot, scope, actually you are providing the parents some methods or maybe data that he can control or change, something like this, maybe.
Yep. Yes, exactly. So it's sort of like it just exposes some pieces of code that you want to like completely optionally. So if the programmer who made this toggle does not want people to access the toggle method, they can remove it, right? And it's very limiting because only the markup that's inside this toggle can use it, and that's the intention, of course, because you don't want this toggles methods, etc., leaking outside and having undesired side effects. So that is how scope is limited. But this is like a very simple way of abstracting logic, because now you can have if you look at headless UI, let's look at headless UI and come to view. You see the drop down. So if you look at this, the entire thing, styling is done in the parent itself, and the rest is managed. Say if the slot active, so we can have an active state of some kind. So all of this markup is actually passed by us, that is the developer who is using the component, and then we can use the slot scopes to see if you want to set a particular style or not. So that's totally up to us. So all the styling and the opinions are handled by us, but the logic is handled by the drop-down component itself. So if you look at this, there is no logic written for toggling the drop-down and anything, but it works here.
So it's like some kind of reverse system where it's a component who is providing all the behaviors.
Yeah. And
but the is controlling, or maybe controlling the style, or maybe the component can define some styles, but the parent still has some control over how maybe one or two local state variable changes, so maybe the style can adapt to.
Exactly. So it's see, if you see, in essence, it's not very different from a regular component, right? So if this component was not renderless and offered as it is, I could still use it, and this, the slots scope could also be useful. But now what we do is, in a renderless case, the opinions are completely stripped of the component, and you can choose however you want this to behave. So that's the general idea. If you look into the code base of this, you'll see the render function is just a scoped slot. So that's about it. It's the only difference between a renderless component and a regular function is that the renderless function will never impose its style opinions on the markup. It will just return the scoped slot, one single slot, and you can use it however way you want.
Okay, it's a very interesting concept to encapsulate behavior in a component, and to reuse it.
Definitely.
Thank you.
I think you should try see the link which I've added here. It's written by Adam Watt itself, and this is an excellent example of how see, these two lists are the same renderless component, just different designs. So you get the idea of how powerful this can be. So this talk is that the slides are available on my website. You can just read this. This is an excellent article.
Okay.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Most welcome. Any other question? Cool, that's about it. So again, if you want to get in touch with me, hey@shivam.dev. I'm available on Twitter and everything. You can find all the links on my website. And if the talk is advanced, advanced-view.shivam.dev. Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Shivam. That was a really great session.
Thank you.
So, as I already mentioned previously, our third session, it still stands cancelled since our speaker, Shiva Mishra, is not available today. So I guess if anybody wants, since some of us are already here, if anybody wants to have an open talk regarding anything, you can take the stage, or we can wrap up.
Yeah, I have a question for Shivam. Actually, I'm new to Vue. So if he shares about the code base, how they're maintaining components, and then means I'm an Angular developer, still 3 to 4 years. I'm new to Vue. Means the best practices of Vue. If you anything you can share.
Sure.
Helpful for me.
So since you're starting out, right? Just remember, Vue documentation is excellent. Both Vue 2 and Vue 3 is very comprehensive documentation. So do give those a read. But if you want more concrete tips, so if you're building a large application, or if you plan to build a large application, I would suggest just use Nuxt. Nuxt.js, if for React folks, it's very similar to Next.js. So the benefits that you get with using Nuxt is that all the directory structure, your project structure, and everything is imposed of sorts with Nuxt. It also provides a lot of API goodies, syntax sugars on making things easier for you. So the default way I build apps at the moment is Nuxt. The only downside is that you'll have to wait for the Nuxt community to catch up with the new Vue features or new trends in the ecosystem, like ES build and other things. But if you're building a large application, and if you're building it with a team, sure, use Nuxt. The other thing is that about design itself, if you're building large applications, don't sweat on building your own component system unless you really have the bandwidth for it. Otherwise, just simply use Chakra UI or any other component system. That will make your development really easy. And especially but if you, in case you're learning and you want to learn, I'd suggest don't use component systems at all and try to build your own components. What that will do is it'll help you learn the life cycle better. The other thing on the note of life cycle, both Nuxt and Vue have their own explicit life cycles. It's very important to know and understand this life cycle. So to understand Vue, the key is to understand the life cycle. So if you want to build a great component, you need to understand the life cycle of it. The Vue documentation is excellent on that. So the other note is very important note is understand the life cycle of your components and your applications. So those are some starting tips that I can think on top of my head. But again, if you want, like, if you have more specific questions, feel free to email me or ask right now. It's fine.
Sure. Thank you, Shiva.
Shivan, it's very interesting that you say that instead of to bootstrap from now on a new Vue application, to use Nuxt or maybe some kind of static site generators instead of the usual Vue CLI or maybe a React CLI, because it provides a lot of functionality for the routing and also for static pages generation. So do you think that in the future we might only use maybe a Vite, the tool from EVANU, to just bootstrap any application, because they provide so many new features and also for a better developer experience? It's very interesting that we're going this way.
So, so for those who don't know, Vite is the new front-end tooling, which is essentially, let's say, if you want to create a Vue application, you would set up Webpack and everything. Vite is just a replacement for that, and it's really fast. So the ecosystem is still catching up on that. And the SSR, for instance, Vite SSR is still fairly new. And Vite does not solve the problem of, architecting your app yet. So which in itself is something that it should not do in the first place. But when using Nuxt, the best thing is that it actually defines a lot of these conventions for you, that your routes go into this directory and your routes will automatically be built, your component go in this directory and they'll be automatically be injected. This is where you write all your plugins. This is how you create modules. So what this does is that it creates a strong mental model for you and your team. So whenever someone is debugging someone else's code, they know where to look at, or at least know where to start looking at. That is one thing. And the other thing is that Nuxt 2 right now still depends heavily on Webpack, but Nuxt 3 onwards, I believe they have custom loaders and everything. And you can actually use Vite with Nuxt on Nuxt 3. So you'll still get all the benefits that Vite provides. That is, super fast HMR loading, which is powered by ESBuild and everything. And you can still get the directory structure and the everything from the Nuxt, the opinions from Nuxt itself. So it does not have to be a choice between the two. You can choose both.
Maybe another question regarding the next maybe stack for Vue.
Okay.
It's about Vue router. Since if we from now on again we use Nuxt to bootstrap a new application, do we still need to learn Vue router, or maybe any specific functionality from that library? Because basically Nuxt is taking care of a lot of things. So what is special in Vue router that we need to know, we still need to learn?
So although Nuxt manages your routes for you, there might be cases where you want to do some more complicated logic, so you can extend your routes. So let's say if you want a route, one particular route to point at a separate component or separate page in the list, right? So by default, there is a directory-based routing, but if you want to break away from the directory-based routing, you can use extend the Nuxt router within Nuxt config. So it's possible. But by and large, in most cases, you don't have to actually worry about Vue router when you're using Nuxt.js.
Okay.
Awesome. So, anybody else would like to ask anything? We still have Mohan on the call as well. So, if anybody has any queries related to Webpack. Okay, I guess we can wrap up then. So I've shared a link to a small feedback form. So please do take the time to fill it out. It really helps us, understand a few things and make improvements on every sessions that we conduct in the future. Also, we run JetBrains license, a raffle for giving away JetBrains license. So you can sort of opt in for the same thing on the feedback form. So please do check it out. And the JetBrains license is not available for. The raffle is not available for students. The reason is because JetBrains already has a free program for students, wherein you can provide your university IDs and you would be able to get an all-pack license, right? So if you're a student, please do check out the JetBrains website. I would like to, put a short note on our sponsors. So TrustRace is sponsoring us right from the starting of the community that we founded. So TrustRace is a traceability provider headquartered in Sweden. So they predominantly work around sustainability and helping brands build sustainable products. So I am one of the lead engineers at TrustRace as well, and we are hiring too. So please do check out our job page or the careers page on our website, trustrace.com. You can, we also have JetBrains sponsoring us licenses for our every monthly meetup. So if you have not yet tried JetBrains, this may be a good opportunity to, opt yourself in for a free license, or you can also try the trial for a product of your choice and check out JetBrains. It's a really great product. Really great products that JetBrains is building out for the development community. So stay safe and, let's break the spread this COVID. Use mask when you're going out, sanitize when you're coming in. So keep safe, stay healthy. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a great Saturday.
Have a happy weekend, guys.
Yeah.
Thanks for joining.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Mohan. Thank you, Shivam, and thank you everyone else for participating.
Did somebody had some